This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin, and with me this week are two fantastic human beings, Kara Szymborski.
Hello.
And Kait Lamphere.
Hi.
Thank you both for joining me this week. I'm very excited because we're talking about our Goodreads Book of the Month, as voted on by our Goodreads Book of the Month folks and everyone who's out in our Goodreads group. But before we get into that, I got to ask the question I ask every single week. How have you been, and how have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kara.
Okay, so unpopular opinion, but I am totally fine with the whole staying at home thing. Like, I'm really okay with not interacting with humans. Like, to be fair, I should clarify that I'm lucky enough to have parents who have a house who invited me to come and live with them for this. But that said, it's really nice, like, just being here. I don't know. Like, I know everyone's talking about how they're just going crazy and they want to get out of the house and they want to go do stuff. And I'm like, why? Like, I get it. Like, I love travel and I love, like, going places with my friends. But at my core, like, I'm a little hobbit. Like, I just want to hang out in my hole in the ground with my books and my tea kettle. Like, I'm fine.
So the new rule of the land is that, you know, you can go out 4 times a year, but otherwise you have to stay home. Is that the thing you're saying? Like, I want to go out just for like four times, like for a week at a time, and then after that I'm staying home. That's it, and that should be okay by everybody.
I don't know. It's like I'm fine. I'm like, I don't know, like the overall stress of everything and avoiding the virus and trying to, like, stay healthy and all that, like that's ooh. I've had better mental health days, let me tell you. But like, staying at home part of it, that part specifically, doesn't really bother me. And it bothers so many people. And I'm just like, oh, am I, like, way more of it? Like, I know I'm an introvert, but am I like a super introvert? Like, this is all okay.
I mean, it's fortunate that, you know, we're in positions where we can do that. You know, I mean, if we, you know, were folks that had to go work out and these essential jobs, I mean, that's a whole other thing. But I can relate to that to a certain extent.
So last week was, I work at a school and we were doing distance learning, but last week was our spring break, which we still kept. And I turned my spring break into the excuse that I was waiting for to marathon Sailor Moon Crystal, which is and this is actually comic related because listeners of the show will recall that I super love the Sailor Moon manga from the 90s. And so Sailor Moon Crystal is the new Sailor Moon anime that they started producing, like, I don't know, 2015, I think. And they made this version of the anime, like, hyper accurate to the manga. So the Sailor Moon anime from the 90s, that if you saw it on Cartoon Network at 6 a.m. or, like, were torrenting it later, like, that anime was, like, loosely based off the manga, but they actually were making the anime, like, ahead of the manga, so they made up a bunch of stuff, and, like, the characters were slightly different in the anime that they were in the manga, and, like, the manga was, like, created by a woman for a female audience, and the anime was created by a bunch of dudes interpreting that. So there was a lot more, like, here's a slow pan of this character's legs and things like that. So I was very interested to see this new interpretation of Sailor Moon as an anime that is, like, it's so close to the manga that, like, the dialogue is essentially the same. They take, like, panels from the manga and, like, turn it into a shot. Like, it is the most, like, closely hewn to the source material film version of a comic I think I've ever seen.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. I will say they did add a few things, but it was like they didn't make stuff up. They were, like, adding things that the artist Naoko Takeuchi, like, alluded to in the original manga. So, like, for example, there's, like, it was like a piece of art that she did that in the manga version that I have, which is the US version, they use it as like a chapter entry page. And I think in Japan it was like released as part of an art book, and it's like the inner like sailor senshi, so like Jupiter, Venus, Mars, Mercury, like cuddling up with these like the evil generals from the first story arc, and you're like what? There's a shipping opportunity here, and they never really speak about it in the manga, but you're kind of like, okay, but they're all reincarnated, and we find out that like the generals actually weren't always evil, so maybe they all used to date. Why don't I know more about this? So in the show, they actually like take a few minutes to be like, yup, they were all hanging out, and there's some stuff going on, and they don't get like so into it where they're like making stuff up, but you're just like, you saw that piece of art too. You also interpreted that as there was something going on, and now you have verified this for me. Thank you so much. So like little things like that where it's like, even if it's not like the exact manga recreated, it's like you saw where they got there from material in the manga, or like there would be like a panel in the manga that vaguely alludes to something that's never mentioned again, but in the show they actually like let it play out for a couple minutes. So anyway, cool. It was very cool, Mike. I'm glad I watched it. That was a good vacation.
Have you been reading any comics?
I am making the questionable decision to reread The Wicked and the Divine, because I never read the final arc of it, because at that point I was like trade waiting and like waiting for the library to get it. And then the pandemic. So, but I realized that the final trade is now on Hoopla. So, and I have like the first, I think, 2 trades in like physical form. So I'm gonna reread The Wicked and the Divine, because I'm a person where if there's like the last chapter of something or the last volume of something is coming out, or like the last season for television, I want to like reread and rewatch everything, so everything is fresh in my mind, so I can see how all the threads come together. So I'm doing that with The Wicked and the Divine. And I did check with Tia before I did this, because I was like, Tia, is this a really bad choice that I'm making? Like, am I going to feel a lot of feelings that I maybe don't want to feel right now? And she was like, well, yes. So it's up to you. And I was like, you know what? I do want to feel feelings right now. Make me feel, Kieran Gillen.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. So that's where I'm at.
Okay. What about you? What have you been reading? What have you been digging? How have you been feeling? All that stuff. We're in strange times.
Yeah, I've been good. I've been reading a whole bunch of comics off of Hoopla instead of reading the comics from the library that I have in physical form, or any of the ones that I own. As usual, nothing has really changed in that way. And I read 2 things off of Hoopla's bonus borrows, which means that I don't have to use any of my credits. And one of them is Vox Machina Origins. This is from the Critical Role folks. So the writers are Matthew Colville and Matthew Mercer, and the artist is Olivia Sampson with colors by Chris Northrup. And I haven't listened to Critical Role, but I've heard that the story makes it worth listening to. And I feel like instead of listening to, like, I guess 4-hour episodes, numerous 4-hour episodes,
yeah.
I think that the comic book form is probably the way that I'm going to go, because it looks like there's going to be another volume at least.
Yeah. And
I really did enjoy this, even though it's like clearly a D&D campaign rewritten as a comic book. Like it worked for me. Like there are parts in it where you can tell that like someone rolled a 1, or
yeah.
The DM might have been like, oh no, my guys are about to die, so I have to make something totally crazy happen so that they all survive. And, you know, they just throw that in there. And, but it, you know, you have like the punchy barbarian, the peaceful druid, the sneaky rogues, and the charismatic bard that kind of seems like the party leader. He kind of like drives all of the action a little bit. And my only complaint really is that there were clearly some fights or encounters cut out for the sake of like a comic book page count.
Oh, sure.
But I don't know. I enjoyed it all the same. It was really daring do, and mystery solving and all of the good stuff about D&D all compacted into a volume. So
wait, how could you tell if a fight scene was cut short? Like, you just got a vibe?
Like there was one point where the party got split, or before the party really came together, like Volume 1 Origins is about how they came together, and you walk in on two of the characters having just slain a monster, and like they're clearly finishing a conversation, but there really wasn't a transition into that. Like it just, like, you turn the page and boom, there's a dead monster.
Oh, okay.
Or like they were walking from one side of town to the other side of town, and the next panel makes reference to an encounter that they just had, but we didn't see. So like it's clearly like parts of a larger story that were included. So I have no idea how long this volume took in terms of how many like D&D sessions happened, but it must have been a whole lot of them.
I see.
And I mean, I guess I'm assuming that this is actually the story that they tell in the actual Critical Role podcast / show. But it definitely seemed like it was an actual campaign, just because of the way that the story moved along and random things happened.
That's kind of cool, though. I mean, because I know that like other D&D comics and stuff like that, they kind of craft the story in with some idea, like high level D&D mechanics or thoughts and stuff, and then they craft it more narratively so that it flows better. But to hear that like the clunkiness, I don't know how else to describe it, of a D&D campaign being transferred over into this story, that's actually pretty refreshing.
Yeah, and I didn't think that it would work. I mean, like, if you had described this to me, I'd be like, I feel like that would bother me a lot. But stepping into it, knowing that that's what it was, it worked for me. But I also really like D&D, and I play D&D. So
right.
I get it. Like,
Yeah,
I understand how these things happened. And then I also read Snow Glass Apples by Neil Gaiman, and the artist was Julie Dillon. This is a really dark retelling of the Snow White tale from the stepmother's point of view.
Oh,
and
boy.
Yeah, and Snow White is actually some kind of like vampire. Like, she's like this kind of charismatic being that feeds on the life force of other creatures. And the stepmother, at least from her own point of view, is a pretty compassionate queen. She's not like the evil, takes advantage of everybody stepmother that we know from the traditional Disney movie at least. But she does kind of go a little bit nuts trying to figure out how to solve this Snow White problem, because she was like, this person is a child. Like, I don't want to kill a child, but also this person is, you know, essentially killing a whole bunch of like this segment of my kingdom, and it's starting to affect like the economic status of, you know, everything, the whole kingdom.
Kate, I gotta tell you, I was thinking about this book last night because I was like, all right, tomorrow we're talking about Fables and we're talking about Snow White, and then I was like, that Neil Gaiman version though, where like the prince is a necrophiliac. Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about that part. Oh yeah, that was super weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like, I really wanted to talk about the art. Oh my gosh, I don't even know how to describe this art. It's so unique. It's reminiscent of stained glass, and then it doesn't avoid being dark and ominous. So like, it's super enchanting. It's completely unique. It wouldn't be out of place if you were to like walk into like ruins that no one knows who made this building, and you look up and there's this literal stained glass of fairy tale characters. Like, it's just like page after page of this ominous stained glass look. And
I just looked this up, and I just need to issue a little correction. That artist on this is Colleen Doran, not Julie Dillon. I don't know. Maybe you have a different edition, or I'm looking at the wrong book. But I think we're talking about the same book here, and I see it. It looks like the illuminated like volumes of medieval texts. You know, like is this the same book that we're talking about here, Kate?
Yep.
That does sound really familiar, but it's wrong in Goodreads. So
okay. Well, this is all Goodreads' fault. I was looking at another website, or I was looking at Amazon, so I just wanted to issue
it was
a more accurate
correction
website.
there. Yeah. But yeah, no, this looks super beautiful. Like I totally see what you mean by stained glass window. Like the very intricate but like very organized layouts of the pages. Looks gorgeous. Holy cow! I'm surprised I'd never seen this book before. This is fantastic.
Yeah. And then the things that I've been into lately, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Like I'm talking about all these weird ways that people are telling their stories right now, and that's kind of what I'm into. Like there's this pattern in storytelling that's just kind of like, why not? Like, why don't I try this weird thing? Like the D&D game, or this crazy different dark interpretation of Snow White. I've also been watching Outlander in season 4. Like it's I mean, a lot of people have heard of Outlander, but there's time travel involved, and in the first couple of seasons it's like nobody knows how it works, and you don't know if it's going to work again to travel back to the main character's original time or anything like that. It's this very secretive, mysterious power. And then by season 4, there's all sorts of people time traveling, and it's just like off the wall. Like,
because why not? Once you've introduced time travel once, everybody can do it.
And then I've been listening to a podcast called Camp Monsters that's put out by REI, the store, and it takes folklore stories. Most of them are about in the U.S. So like this guy is pulling out these stories that I've never heard of that take place in Maryland, but like people from Maryland have heard of the folklore. It's cool, but they rewrite the context of the story to make them about like rock climbing or backpacking or scuba diving or like some outdoorsy thing. And it's just like these creators or these retellers are like making all these unexpected decisions that you wouldn't think would work because they're so off the wall. Mm-hmm. But it totally works for me, and it's popular stuff, so it works for a lot of other people too.
That's cool. I thought you were going to say that this was this podcast that our buddy Cinco on the Discord was telling us about, called The Old Gods of Appalachia, which is like this. It's a fictional podcast about these made-up myths about the mountains of the Appalachian area, it's very creepy but super well produced. But I think, Kate, you might dig that if you're up the alley of weird folklore stories. But again, this is like a like a Limetown or a Welcome to Night Vale, where it's like very, very well produced.
Yeah, I definitely want to check that out too. That's on my very long list of podcasts that I need to read.
Yeah.
Mike, how about you? What's your deal been?
Oh, I've been all over the place, mostly because my whole life is revolving around Animal Crossing. Like, I have to play it twice a day so I can get my turnip prices set, and figure out what the potential spike's going to be in selling turnips and playing the stock market, as they call it. But I have been reading some comics. The big thing that I actually want to talk about is I read all of Locke and Key this week, with the exception of the 2 one-shots that came out after the series ended. But I did read everything that was available in like all of the trades and all this stuff. Because a while back, I think when the Locke and Key TV show came out, I bought all of the issues on Comixology at like super discount. So I was like, the other day I sat down and I was like, I did buy all of that. Maybe I should read it. And I got 2.5 volumes in one night, and then it was like 1:30 in the morning. I was like, okay, I got to stop reading, but this is very good. I'm going to finish this. And finish it I did. I started reading yesterday at like midnight, thinking, oh yeah, I'll just read a volume. And then next thing I knew, this was last night before we were, yesterday, I guess, I decided to read all of it, the rest of it, which is like 4.5 volumes worth of story. And so I was up till almost 3:45 in the morning reading it. And man, it is good. The reason why I couldn't stop is because I don't know how you could. Like, I think I'd be pulling my hair out waiting for the issues to come out month to month when this book was coming out. But that being said, from beginning to end, I felt like this very beautiful consistency of character writing and story development, with the exception of a couple of leaps that they made at the end to kind of wrap everything up. Like, on the whole, this book was amazingly done. I think Rodriguez's art is fantastic from beginning to end, and you can see him getting better as an artist as the series goes on. The broken up story into multiple mini-series, I think maybe annoys collectors to a certain extent, but as a reader, I think it's crucial for them to do that. Like, if you look at each volume as like a novel in a series, there's no other way they could have done it because the story isn't continuous. The story is segmented, and so allowing the comics to be segmented as well, to say, okay, these first 6 issues take place at this time period, and then 2 months are going to pass, and then this next 6 issues is going to come out, and they're going to reference that time has passed, and you're going to see that the school year that they're going to school in is passing. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. For those of you that don't know what Locke and Key is, it's probably one of the most popular independent series that has come out in the last 20 years. I mean, we're going to talk about another one of those today, but this family, a terrible thing happens, and they have to move across the country from the West Coast to the East Coast to an old family home. And inside that house, there are these magical keys that allow you to do things like turn yourself into a ghost, or go back in time, or do all sorts of other things. And I don't want to spoil anything, because even that is almost revealing of the story. But through tragedy and the continuous tragedy that befalls this family, a very beautiful story is crafted about the importance of family and the importance of understanding your trauma and learning to live with it rather than trying to run from it. And I really appreciated the whole story. I mean, by the end of it, I was very wrapped up in the story of the Locke family, and I was very, very overwhelmed in the end, because just I get pulled into stories about people talking to just in general. Again, I'm spoiling things. I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, I'm really glad that I decided to fall down this rabbit hole, because it was a pleasure to watch Tyler, Kinsey, and Bodie, the main characters, struggle and grow up and kind of learn to deal with this trauma. Like I said, I mean, their mom is also a pivotal character. She deals with alcoholism and other things. I mean, she also lost a husband. I mean, that's kind of the beginning of the story. The dad of the family, he dies, and so everyone is dealing with the loss of their father, and as well as this newfound world that they put themselves in by moving across the country. And yeah, by the end, it was a lot of really interesting stories that I think Joe Hill tried to do a lot of experimental things. I think Rodriguez really did some interesting work with his art, but I think that the combination of these two, they took a lot of risks in this book. I think many of those risks paid off. I think trying to do a Lovecraftian story in a semi-modern day actually worked well, because spoilers, there is some Lovecraftian scariness in this book, but I think that some of the other risks that they took didn't really pay off. And I'm looking at, sorry, spoilers, there is a race-changing mirror that they use at some point. I don't know why that's necessary to be in this story, but they did it. And there's, I don't know, they use the R word a lot. I'm not going to go into what that is, but And yeah, but I think the book, though, on the whole, while it has some dated bits and some things that probably wouldn't fly in 2019, 2020, I think on the whole it's a very good read. If you can look past those minor issues, I think on the whole it's pretty good. And it's not really a book that I think you can sit down and read in one go. Don't do what I did. But it is a book that you probably want to read in quick succession, because the story is very, very compelling, especially the last 2 volumes. I don't know how you couldn't read those back to back. But yeah, I really, really liked it. I thought it was probably one of the cooler books that I've read in a while. And this is a book that's been out for a really long time. I don't know what took me so long to read it. I know that at one point I had read 5 volumes of it and then stopped, and I don't know why. So I'm glad that I picked them all up again and finished it off, because boy, it was very rewarding at the end.
How many volumes are there?
There's 7 volumes total.
I like how you're like, I don't know what possibly could have gotten in the way of me reading this. And I'm like, I don't know, Mike, maybe the 20 X-Men titles a month you were reading for a while there.
Kara. I mean, that's the, I mean, again, silver lining to this awful dark cloud in the sky above all of us. I mean, not having comics come out every week means that I think a lot of people are digging into their backlogs and reading books that they've been putting off. Like Lock and Key is a book that I've been putting off for years. And I'm glad that I actually sat down to read it, because I was, like I said, I was very emotionally invested in it by the end. And I really enjoyed the way that Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez were able to wrap things up without it feeling forced. It was a very natural, beautiful conclusion to the story. But Anyways, beyond that, the only other thing, like I said, I've been really into Animal Crossing. I mean, like literally 20 minutes before we started recording, I was on the IRCB Discord chatting with one of the guys on there. Shout out to Jeff, you're the man, who lives on the West Coast. And I was trying to buy turnips, and I had missed the cutoff time to buy turnips on my island. He's like, "Hey, I'm in California or somewhere, I don't know, on the West Coast. You can come to my island and still buy them." So shout out to Jeff for helping me spend, almost 300,000 bells in my game. The other thing is, I haven't played it yet, but Super Mario Maker 2 just dropped. It dropped a huge update, which allows you to create your own custom worlds, and they added a whole bunch of extra features to the game that really make this one of the most powerful game building customizer games out there. Not that there are many like this, but the fact that Nintendo is like, hey, we don't want to make 2D Mario games anymore. How about you people in the world just create 2D Mario games for each other and have fun with it? So I really love that game. It's been really fun. And so I need to actually dig into this new update with all the new powers and stuff. So I'm very excited to maybe take a whole Saturday and just shut myself off from the rest of the world and just play Super Mario Maker all day and create some levels. So that's what's been up with me. But yeah, I guess we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about our Goodreads Book of the Month, Fables Volume 1, so get hyped for that. We're talking all about myths and lore today, so get ready. For our show this week, we are talking about our Goodreads Book of the Month as voted on by the wonderful people over at our Goodreads group. This month we are talking about Fables Volume 1, Legends in Exile. This is written by Bill Willingham with art by Lan Medina, and I'm pretty sure there are other credits to that, but I didn't pull them out of the actual volume, so we're sorry to all you wonderful colorists and inkers out there, editors and assistants. Your names just haven't been listed on the internet, so that's my bad. But anyways, we are talking about this book, so just a warning, full spoilers for Fables Volume 1. And if you haven't read it, stop what you're doing, go read the volume, and then come back and press play. But for now, we're going to talk about this thing. Kara, you're our resident Fables expert. I mean, you're our resident Disney expert, Archie expert. What else that isn't happy-go-lucky are you an expert on? I mean, come on. But, well, I guess maybe some of that other stuff, maybe Fables isn't that happy-go-lucky, but still, it's fairy tales.
I don't really think I'd call Fables happy-go-lucky in any sense.
No.
That's all right.
But it's about fairy tales, right? It's got to be plucky. Okay. Tell us about this volume.
Okay. So a couple years ago, I read basically all of Fables, and when I say all of Fables, I mean like the tie-in series, the offshoot original graphic novels. They had like some prose novels for this. They had like a video game. Like, there is a lot to Fables. Like, we're looking at some really humble beginnings here with this first volume, because this is a hugely sprawling story. And like, let's be real, this was paying the bills at Vertigo forever. So
yeah.
Like, Vertigo losing Fables was a big deal when Bill Willingham was finally wrapping it up.
Yeah, I mean, it ran for 13 years, from 2002 to 2015. Like, yeah, that's a crazy run in any comic sphere, right? Like, I can only name a handful of other books that are written by one writer for that long, like on one or two hands.
So Fables, I think Fables succeeded for so long because it's actually a pretty simple premise that you can do a lot with. Like, the premise of Fables that we're introduced to in Volume 1 is that all these fairy tale characters that we know had to escape from their realms, and they are now like living in exile in New York City, and they're hiding from us normal people, the mundanes, or the mundies. And we're kind of seeing in this first volume that tension between like who they like used to, like what their roles used to be and what their roles currently are. We're starting to see some characters that we might recognize and some that we might not know a whole lot about yet. And this is like, as someone who read so much of this, I gotta say, one thing that Fables did really well is reinterpret some of these characters or introduce you to like new fairy tale characters. And kind of like going back to what you were saying about happy-go-lucky, there's a like I think the characters in Fables adhere more closely to maybe the original folk tale inspired fairy tales that were like codified in the Brothers Grimm stories or the Charles Perrault stories, and kind of like more darker than we're used to from the lighthearted Disney interpretations. Like I think when a lot of people think fairy tales now, growing up in the 20th century or the 21st century, you do tend to think, oh, the Disney versions. And the Disney versions really did go out of their way to be kid-friendly, family-friendly, glossed over a lot of really violent stuff in the older versions of the tales that they were drawing from. So I want to... I think a good example of this is the character of Snow White in Fables. We're introduced to her pretty early on. She's basically running the show. And if your exposure to Snow White prior to this was Disney's version of Snow White, you're like, what? The princess?
According to Neil Gaiman, she's a vampire, right?
It's like, but if your exposure to her is like the Disney version, you're like, the girl with the annoying voice who was like the Disney prototype of all their princesses, like that girl's in charge of like running this community. And I'm like, oh, friend, you clearly have not read the original Grimm version. So a few years ago, I actually took an online course about fairy tales and their origins, and how, because they are based on folk tales, there are maybe multiple versions that like over time became a little more codified, but there are like there are different interpretations of kind of the same story. And this was like kind of a mind-blowing experience for me learning about the character Snow White, because my experience up till that point had been the Disney version, where she is like a little fluffy. But in the original like German folk tales, she's basically like anywhere between like 9 and 12 years old. And you have to remember, like, this is set like hundreds of years ago. So all right there, you have to think like, okay, in terms of, education or life skills, a little girl hundreds of years ago, even if she was royalty, like maybe she knows how to read, probably doesn't know a lot of math, maybe minimal geography, a lot of sewing. And like not really big on like the life skills thing, probably pretty sheltered, never really like travel. And so when in the story Snow White's stepmother decides, time for you to die, and then Snow White's reaction is to run away and essentially barter for her safety. Like essentially what she does is this little girl with like very little knowledge, very little life skills, but she goes into the woods, she finds these dwarves that are living there, and is basically like, hey, I'd like to exchange my manual labor in your home for your protection. So that version of Snow White is kind of like the Snow White that I see in this Fables, especially like in volume 1, we're introduced to Snow White, and she's like, we already get the sense that she is like in charge, she's super tough, she doesn't take crap from anybody, she's like apologizing for crying, which I have problems with, but like she's like, that is the Snow White that I think Bill Willingham drew from, is that more like folk tale Snow White, the Grimm version of Snow White, where it's basically this little girl who is in a really scary situation and figures out a way to like manage it. And I'm like, oh, this is the Snow White in Fables. Cool. Got it.
Yeah, and I think throughout the whole volume we see kind of the more folklore versions of any of these characters, right? I think Willingham was probably trying to shy away from as much Disney stuff as possible, because the happy-go-lucky versions of these characters aren't nearly as compelling as their grim, like, fairy tales version or counterparts, And I think we get that with pretty much everybody. I especially like the Beauty and the Beast bit. Like, I know that it's like, it's kind of shitty. It's like a weird shitty thing where like this woman, Beauty, is mad at Beast, and because of that he starts to revert more and more back to his beast form. Like, I don't know why that really tickled me for some reason as I read it. And I don't like that, to me doesn't really track with the Disney version, but I don't know what the Grimm fairy tale version is, so I just assume it's probably something like that, right? Like the love of the beauty is what made Beast back into a regular hot looking dude, right?
Well, I mean, we never knew if he was hot to begin with. This is all subjective, Mike.
True.
He's just not an animal anymore.
Yeah. So this volume kind of follows, a mystery. Snow White's sister Red has gone missing, and Red Rose, excuse me, and she's gone missing, and presumably she's been murdered, and it's quite actually terrifying to see the apartment where she was murdered.
Allegedly.
Allegedly murdered. And so the person who's on the case is the sheriff of all of the Fables, Bigby Wolf, a.k.a. the Big Bad Wolf. And to this minute, that tickles me to hear this person's name is Bigby Wolf, and he's the Big Bad Wolf. I don't know why.
It's pretty terrific.
I think that's so funny. It's so funny to me.
He's like this gnarly... He's basically like Harvey Bullock, but a wolf. Like, if you're familiar with the Batman character, just like the grossest detective you can possibly imagine, except he can also turn into a wolf, and that's Bigby.
Yeah, and I like that Willingham really shied away from trying to push... I mean, like, there is magic in the various Fable things, like, as they're walking through the Fables underground compound or whatever in New York, we see, like, monkeys with flying wings and stuff like that, and we see all these magical things. We run into characters that have rooms that are bigger than others, and they talk about magic, but we don't actually see these characters as the fairy tale versions of themselves. They are people that happen to be these fairy tales until very specific moments in the story when, Bigby Wolf snaps and has to go save Jack and he turns into a wolf in the moment to try to jump against Bluebeard, which I don't know who Bluebeard was. I feel like there's a story that I should know. Is that from like 1001 Arabian Nights or something? I don't know.
Bluebeard is a pirate, and his MO was marrying women with lots of money and then viciously murdering them on their wedding night. So
okay,
which they kind of allude to in this, but like that's very much like directly pulled from a fairy tale, if you want to call it that. It's like a tale of gruesome murder and violence against women is probably a more accurate title, but
right.
I do like how they combine the lesser known fairy tales with the better known fairy tales. And for the most part, that works for me, like including Jack and Bluebeard and such. But the one that I always got stuck on was Flycatcher. I never liked him, and I've read the first few volumes.
I don't know who that character is.
I figure he's supposed. I think they explain it later, but we're like rereading this volume, not having read them in a while. I was like, is he the Frog Prince?
That makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. See, half of this discussion is just going to be us dissecting who are these characters.
Well, he's just super awkward, and I don't really find him. I guess he's kind of endearing, like he's just a sweet boy, but he's not a sweet enough boy for me to like be like, oh, the baby.
Well, and him and Boy Blue are just like the dummies that like
have to recreate the crime scene.
Yeah.
They're just like recreating this crime. So what I forgot about this volume, again, having not revisited it in a while, is that it is kind of this self-contained story that is very self-aware as to what it is. Like Bigby Wolf towards the end is very clear about his utter delight in getting his parlor scene moment where he can reveal to everybody how he solved the mystery and who is the killer. And it's just... like, I love Agatha Christie mysteries, so for me, I'm just kind of like, all right, you big ham, let's get this over with. So
have you been watching Miss Marple during this time in quarantine? Because there's a whole bunch of that on Hulu, I guess.
I have the actual books, Mike. The actual novels.
I see.
No, so I thought that for this volume 1, that was actually very clever storytelling device, because the first volume is this bloody murder mystery, so you're drawn in because of the mystery, and then kind of on the way you're learning more about the world that we're in and some of the world building aspects and how these characters ended up in New York City. And basically everything from here is like, let's continue to grow this. So it was very interesting to see like all these seeds planted like this early on, and to like there were some characters that were included in this first volume that I didn't realize were introduced this early. For example, when we first meet Bluebeard, the perhaps murderous pirate, he is fencing with Cinderella, and Cinderella's only there for like that scene, but then you find out later that she's like their secret agent who like does missions around the world. Oh yeah, like there's multiple Cinderella like offshoot stories and like graphic novels where you're just seeing the really cool spy shit she gets up to. She's basically like,
oh, that's so cool.
She's basically James Bond. It's awesome.
That's really cool.
So I enjoyed seeing her here. Like, yes.
That was one of our Goodreads comics, is Anurig. Sorry if I butchered your name. They said that the next issues or the next volume switch between like action, adventure, family drama, fantasy, period fantasy, heist, horror, love stories, spy stories, war stories, etc. And so like the level of variety across the whole series is what keeps it fresh. And that makes me more inclined to read more of this, because I had originally dropped off after volume 3, and I think it might be because of like the genre switching. It might have kind of thrown me off a little bit, but now that I know that, maybe that will help me continue.
I gotta say, this first volume is way rougher around the edges than I remember. Like rereading it, I was kind of struck by how gross a lot of it is. Like there were multiple uses of the word slut to refer to women, like so casually, and I'm like, ooh, we've moved past that as a society. I guess not, but I hate it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a book that's almost 20 years old. I mean, that's not necessarily an excuse, but like, just like I was reading Lock and Key, like they say the R word quite a bit, and I'm not into that like at all.
There's some rough stuff. And then something else that like kind of struck me, and I guess this is just because I spent a lot of time in New York City, but you know, Rose Red's apartment is in Greenwich Village. Yeah. And it's like the size of a restaurant. Like her living room is a full dance floor. And I'm like, we've established in this book already that none of y'all have money except like maybe King Cole, the mayor, and maybe like Bluebeard, who like maybe got it through murdering his former wives. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
So like we've established that nobody has any money, yet Rose Red can afford an enormous apartment in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Manhattan.
Listen, it's still kind of a fantasy, Kara, okay?
But then it's like they show the apartment is the murder scene, and like even if you ignore all the blood everywhere, like it's a gross apartment. So I'm like,
yeah. Like
maybe Greenwich Village was quote unquote gross in like the 60s, but in the 2000s, like no, like that's an expensive neighborhood. You have nice apartments in that neighborhood.
Yeah, Bill Willingham hadn't been to New York in 30 years. I'm guessing that's probably what it was.
Oh man.
I mean, we haven't really talked about the kind of the grossest part of this volume, which is Prince Charming.
Oh yeah, Prince Charming is the fucking worst. He's like just terrible.
The moment he showed up on screen, I was like, oh, I think it's kind of funny that he can kind of just excuse me. I think it's kind of funny that he could kind of just get his way. It's like, oh no, but he's garbage. Oh, but he's the fucking worst. Like, it'd be one thing if he was just like, hey, don't make me pay my bill, and then he winks and then walks away. But instead he's like, hey, I'm not going to pay my bill. Actually, you're going to pay my bill, and let's go upstairs and have a little bit of wink, wink, nod, nod, if you know what I mean. And she's like, I don't know, I got to work. He's like, you better fucking come with me or else. And she's like, okay. It's like, what the fuck is happening? This is not okay. What the fuck?
Well, you get So what I did like about that is even in this first volume, like you already know that basically if it's a princess that you know like married Prince Charming, like Snow White and Cinderella, like it's the same dude. He's just had multiple wives because he's so shitty they divorce him once they realize he's awful. Mm-hmm. So I did enjoy that piece of like world building and connecting all these stories together, because you know Prince Charming is like almost a placeholder title for just generic dude that will somehow make life better for this woman, and it's like, well, actually he's garbage and we all know it, and these women had to like learn the hard way. But like I thought the interaction with him with the waitress was kind of maybe showing that he's got like some kind of like influence over women. Like he's Prince Charming, so he's able to, maybe that's like a superpower that he has. He can like dial up the charm to kind of convince people to do what he wants, which is so gross, but you kind of get the sense that maybe that's what happened to like Snow White and Cinderella back when they married him, before they were like, oh no, this is bullshit.
I took it as he's like incredibly charismatic, and then he knows how to use it.
Oh, yeah, he absolutely fucking knows. That's why that's what makes it worse, almost, right? Like, he understands how easy he can manipulate people. In particular, he can manipulate women, and he uses that to the full advantage, to the point where he's, like, skeezing money off of people after he's slept with them at their apartment. Like, it is like, every single checkbox down the scumbag list, he is checking page after page every time we talk to him, even into the end of this volume, where he's like, hey, don't worry, I'm going to auction off this thing that has no value to me right now in order for me to have money. And he's just a garbage person. And I think that's like a really funny way to look at that, because it seems like, you know, in those stories here, I think you just pointed this out, that this man's just going to come help fix everything for them. It's like, no, he temporarily made them happy and then was an awful human being afterwards, which is why they were divorced, or he was divorced from, and then he went off to find someone else. So yeah, I'm curious to know what happens with him later, because I feel like he's got to someone's got to get him back.
Well, I'm not saying anything because we're only talking about volume 1, but
yeah. This is almost enough reason for me to want to continue reading. I mean, I've tried to read Fables, I think this particular volume, like 3 times, and I never got through it, and I don't know why.
This volume is, like I said, this volume is rough. Like there's just this really is a series where, if you're even somewhat interested in it, if you stick with it, you will be so satisfied, because some of the later storytelling is really complex and really, like, I remember distinctly crying during one of the volumes because it was so good. But again, revisiting this volume is pretty rough.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, like, I'm surprised how much I liked some of this volume, because I feel like before maybe I wasn't into like the murder mystery, and I felt like intimidated maybe by like not knowing all the fairy tale, characters and stuff. And like, that being said, I realized, you know what, I can actually just roll with a lot of these punches in order to get to the core of the good story here, because I do think that there's a pretty good story here in this first volume. Like, the murder mystery super works. I found Big B Wolf to be incredibly fun to read as a character. And maybe that's just my reading taste changing, because I think the last time I tried to read this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I just couldn't get into it. I'm also a little intimidated by long series, but I'm not anymore, because I'm reading fucking One Piece, and that's got 1,000 chapters. So you know what? My limits and fears there is no limit now. I'm not scared of anything anymore.
The limit does not exist.
Yeah, the limit does not exist.
Kate, what was your question?
I know that we could talk about this for forever as to like who is who in the story, but who is Rose Red?
Okay, so
like, is she new or
no,
or is she an actual? Okay,
yeah. Rose Red is kind of like the original. So in Fables, they kind of combine 2 versions of Rose Red. Like, Rose Red is there's like a version where she's basically like Briar Rose from Sleeping Beauty, and there's another version where I forget the exact details, but like there is a version where she is in a story with a version of Snow White, because again, these are all based off of folk tales that changed and evolved over centuries. But yeah, like I remember when I first read Fables, I was like, who is this? But it's just like a fairy tale character that used to be way more widely known, like pre-Disney, and then Disney kind of commodified a lot of these fairy tales, and collectively we've kind of forgotten about some of these characters like Rose Red, who used to get a lot more story time.
Gotcha. So do we think we're going to keep reading some of this book? I mean, actually, you know what? Before we get to that question, let me ask another question. Was it just me, or does it seem like the travesty or whatever they call the abomination or whatever it was. The adversary, thank you.
The big bad.
Is the adversary just J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings? Because in my mind, as I was reading through this, all the villains, all the adversary troops look like orcs to me. So because like the way they describe it in the volume is that all these fairy tales lived in this huge world and none of them knew each other until the adversary showed up, and they all were like, the adversary growing power, who even cares? And then all of a sudden the adversary's like, I'm going to take this whole world and you got to get GTFO. And as I was looking through this, I was like, hold on. I think this is Lord of the Rings. I think Willingham hates Lord of the Rings, and he thinks that's what destroyed all these fairy tales. Or maybe that's just a fun twist, or just, this is my headcanon now. But I thought that a lot of the enemies or the adversary's troops look like orcs, and all of the, like, a lot of villains from the Lord of the Rings books / movies. Did you guys get that at all, or is it just me?
I think that's just like generic goblin-esque bad dudes at this point.
Sure.
I gotta tell you, because it has been a few years since I read all of this, I do forget who the adversary is. I just remember it's a slow build, and when you get to the reveal, you're like, holy shit. So. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's almost enough. Like, I'm hooked in on this enough that I think I might actually try to read through all the Fables now. If I can do just like one volume a month, I think I could actually, get through it all in 2 years and have a good time. Because I don't know, I was really compelled by this volume. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, because I went into it with lowered expectations because I remember not liking it that much when I had first read it. But after this read, I was actually pretty into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same.
I guess I don't know if you guys had any final thoughts about Fables or anything else you wanted to cover. Because I think there's, like, the murder mystery and all that stuff is really fun. But I just want to know more. Like, I just want to stop talking about this and go read subsequent volumes now because I feel like I really want to invest in this world. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely worth your time if you like complex character development, plot layers. Like, the story does kind of unfold over time, and you do see a lot of characters change and grow up or grow old, and it's not, as we see in this first volume, it's not perfect, but there's a lot of interesting stuff here, especially if you like fairy tales, especially if you like stories where it's like lots of different fictional worlds being pulled together.
I can definitely see that. And I guess this is, if I'm not mistaken, the Fables just covers like European myths and stuff like that, and folklore. And I was just reading on Wikipedia before we jumped onto the show. The Jack of Fables stories covers more of the like American myths, like your Paul Bunyans and stuff like that. Did you get a chance to read that series at all, Kara?
Jack of Fables is the one series I didn't read that's an offshoot of this. And that's mostly because, like, Jack is such a commanding character in the main story that I was just kind of like, well, am I really interested in Jack enough to read like 30 offshoot issues about just him? Right. And I was like, because I was very like go big or go home about it. I was reading everything constantly. So I was like, I don't really know if I want to add this to my plate. Also, like, I was reading the Fairest series, which is like focusing on the female characters. There's like all these Cinderella trades, like, just based off of her missions that she does. So, like, I read all of those. Stuff. I think there's one that's like just about their version of the Snow Queen, who we know now as Elsa from Frozen, except before she got her family-friendly makeover. So, like all that stuff I was just super into. Gotcha.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'm looking at the Wikipedia now, and there's a lot of volumes, and then there's a lot of other stories, there's a lot of other stuff.
There's so much.
I can't believe that one person was writing all of this. That blows my mind.
Yeah. And what really should blow your mind is that a lot of it actually ends up being prose. Like, I think...
Okay.
I don't know if the version of Volume 1 that you read had, like, 4 or 5 prose pages at the end, but mine did. And there's a lot of that as the series progresses. Like, you'll get to the end of a volume, and all of a sudden there's, like, 10 additional pages, and it's all just, like, blocks and blocks of text. And like I said, there's like a couple novels that were written to tie into this, and it's just like Bill Willingham very definitely has a lot to say about all of this.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, just looking at the Wikipedia page is unbelievable how much extra stuff there was. I forgot that they made The Wolf Among Us, that video game, back in 2011. Or 2013, I should say. But anyways, yeah, so Fables is good. I think good stuff. I don't know, Kait, any final thoughts from you about this? You going to keep reading?
I think I might. I do own the first 3 volumes that are in storage someplace, and so I think I'll at least reread those and then maybe continue.
Well, cool. Well, we'll report back, I guess, as we all slowly move through this massive series and stuff like that. But otherwise, I guess you can follow us all on the internet. You can follow Kara at KaraSSam. You can follow Kait at KLFear, and you can follow me at Mike Rappin. And you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and on Instagram, where I try to post things pretty often. Right now, if you listen to this week and then you go on Instagram and you like and comment on this, our most recent post, you can get a free sticker. I'll mail it to your house. We'll make that happen. So go do that today.
This show and our many subscriber-only episodes are powered by fans like you on Patreon. Join now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. If you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Join us on Discord at ircbpodcast.com/Discord and make sure to tell a friend or 2 about the show.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all the music for us. We love them to death. Xander is a high wizard of the grandest kind who lives upon a mountain and comes down to help us edit the show once a week. He's fantastic. I want to say thank you to Kait and Kara for being on this show this week, and thank you to everyone out there who listens and all the folks who hang out with us on Discord and play D&D with us and stuff. It's fantastic. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.
I was kind of waiting for you to say Xander is a fable.
Shit, that's how I should have done it. That's okay. Yeah, I'm good to go for this second half if you guys are.
Oh, yeah. I'm just killing time on the Shop Disney website because all I do is look at the Shop Disney website.
I see. I mean, I know where your priorities are, Kara. I understand.
Look. But okay, so we're coming up on May 4th, and they have some Star Wars stuff ready to go.
Oh, I'm sure.
But, like, it's dumb shit. Like, it's genuinely dumb shit. Like, it says, coming May the 4th at 7 a.m. Pacific, new exclusive products, including this limited release Star Wars Day Key. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's literally like, it looks like a pen with like a Disney D on one side of it, and like on the other side of it is the little Star Wars logo, and I guess like the overall effect is to make this look like a key, but it just looks like something that's gonna end up in a landfill, not disintegrating. So
yeah, what is it? What is its purpose?
Oh my god, I'm gonna send you guys a picture. This is so dumb.
I just looked it up. I don't know what it is.
It's a key. It's a Star Wars key, but it's limited edition, so you better buy it now. I hate things so much. Capitalism is the worst best.
It's a day key. So is it
Star Wars Day? Star Wars Day key. It is a key for Star Wars Day. I don't think it opens anything. I don't think it's for anything. I think it's just like they made a thing and they said, "Look, it's a key. Look, it's collectible."
Collectible key.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Seems like a weird way to spend or create something out of metal, but okay.
I just only have questions.
Hey, you know what? There's a Pinocchio trading card pin where Pinocchio is playing
The billiards one.
Why?
Why not?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I forgot about that. Why not?
Well, because he plays billiards in the movie, and that's why he's a bad boy, because he's engaging in gambling.
Oh, I see. Okay, I forgot that even happened, because I think the last time I saw Pinocchio, I was 9.
Oh, I recommend watching only if you want to be really concerned, because it's a trip. Like, that whole movie is a trip. Okay,
actually, I think I've seen the live action one like a bunch. The one where Jonathan Taylor Thomas does the voice of Pinocchio.
Yeah.
I
That
don't
I've
know.
seen that one a lot.
Oh, I have more. I have more information about the keys because it's a whole collection. It's a
God.
Disney Keys collection. The Disney Store Keys collection. They have been quite the charming collectibles so far. They're plastic, and each one has a unique character design. These limited edition keys are available to shoppers who go to the Disney Store or online. Each key is released to celebrate a special Disney anniversary or event. And there's like 20 of them. There's like a Times Square New York opening key. There's a Mickey's 90th birthday key.
There's this The Adventures of Pinocchio is what that movie's called, by the way. Why though? Why keys though?
Because they're a collectible.
Oh, okay. Because they're collectible. Okay.
Oh,
God, this movie just looks awful. 1996 was a bad year.
Oh my god.
Oh, Martin Landau played Geppetto though, so
What are you looking at?
I'm just posting things in the IRCB
Where are you?
Telegram.
Okay.
Yeah. Just look at that. God, what a horror show. Like, it's clearly a felt puppet, but with no felt on it. Or it's the same kind of puppets as the Lazy Town show.
I really don't think I want to look, Mike. Like, you've sent me this link, and I don't want to look at it.
Yeah, don't. It's kind of awful.
I swear I've seen this movie, but these images don't look familiar.
Well, this sounds like what we're going to do at the next IRCB movie get-together, is we're going to watch this horror show. I'm pretty sure at some point, like, Pinocchio's smoking cigars, like in the animated one.
Yeah.
But it's even more terrifying because it's a puppet smoking cigars.
Oh, no. No, thank you.
Look at those keys, Kara.
I'm not making it up. I'm just saying the next
They've
collection.
been doing this for years, apparently.
Apparently, I have never heard of this, and I'm on this website far too much.
I mean, maybe because you had to, like, do it in person. That was why.
Probably. I don't know. I'm ready to talk about fairy tales.
Yeah, me too. Let's talk about Fables.